I'll give us 1 minute. I'll start talking. But I see some folks are joining. Welcome. Hello, everyone. Give everyone a couple more minutes. Hello, folks on LinkedIn also. Welcome to a C-level analysis of the state of sales. It's awesome to see everyone. Welcome, welcome. Hello, everybody. Udi, is the gong light on? It looks really sharp right now.
It is on. People often ask me if it's fake or not, and then I have to show it off, but it's actually working.
That's great.
It's even cooler that you can control it from your desk. Can you control it?
I have a remote. How awesome is that?
A remote, even better.
It's got a remote and a dimmer and a whole thing. This is what chief evangelists do, in case you wondered.
Can Kermit like jump off the thing and dance around a little bit too? You got something like that?
The morning is young, Mark. The morning is young.
It's all kinds of time. We have an hour to see. Hello, folks in the chat. How we doing? Jillian, Rohan. Hey, everybody. We'll hang for another 60 or so seconds. We'll comment on people's backgrounds, and then we'll jump into this webinar here in a minute.
Well, Professor Brian's background, are we about to get whiteboarded to death back
there?
I
had to erase the real the secrets that were on there before. I had to cut it back.
Clearly I could go for a good Venn diagram first thing in the morning.
Yeah, you know, there's just a lot of all caps and charts that are very spiky. It's good. The worst is when I try to draw on the whiteboard while I'm on a Zoom, and it's are you backwards? Are you forwards? It's not great. All right, let's kick us off. I think if you're here, if you're one of the folks who are tuning in on Zoom or on LinkedIn, you know what we're doing here. But we're talking about the state of sales at the beginning of 2024. For a lot of folks, they're closing their previous year right now. They're in the last minute of Q4. But for some of us, we've already kicked off into 2024 Q1. And as a person who's been in this industry and working with large and small sales organizations over the past 10 plus years, it's a really unique time. We've got the slide queued up right now with some headlines that we saw over the past couple quarters. And it was a little bit of doom and gloom. It's a lot of change, and I think a massive shift in the industry, certainly aligned with some of the economic news we're hearing, but probably the company that we all look to a little bit for guidance, Salesforce, really changing their tune on how they treat and how they at least communicate to their own salespeople. We've seen some of these articles from Lemkin, who I think is one of the best thought leaders in the space, and we've seen some rather doom and gloom articles around the culture changes or the way we sell has to change as well. So I want to dig into it. Luckily, we have three amazing thought leaders and really people leaders in the space to talk about it. But I want to lead off with something that we're seeing from our friends at Forrester, and I couldn't agree more. I'll read the quote for everyone. 72% of frontline sales managers from high-performing companies agree that sales transformation must be a major initiative in their organization over the next 3 years. I think that we'll unpack what sales transformation means to each of us, but I couldn't agree more. Every organization that I talk to, leaders are undergoing some type of change, whether it is process, technological, how they sell, how they connect with their buyer. So let's dive in and introduce our leaders. I am Brian Trouchold. I'm one of the founders of Ambition, but more important than me, we have Dan, Udi, and Mark. And I want you guys to quickly introduce yourselves and also introduce your companies and what you do there. I'll start with Dan from Challenger.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So my name is Dan Flood. I lead the global sales team at Challenger. So many of you on the line are probably familiar with the Challenger sale, the Challenger customer, effortless experience, and then the Jolt effect as kind of the books within the Challenger ecosystem. our organization is one that aims to improve the effectiveness of sales and marketing organizations by teaching clients how to successfully implement the Challenger method across their go-to-market teams. And then, sorry, Brian, am I passing it over, or my definition of sales transformation as well?
Let's do each person first. Udi, how about you go next?
Hey folks, good morning. Happy to be here. My name is Udi Lettergore. I'm the Chief Evangelist at Gong, formerly the Chief Marketing Officer at Gong, where I get to spread the good word of Gong on wonderful events with great thought leaders like here today. Excited to be here.
Thanks, Udi. How about you, Mark?
My name is Mark Cosaglo. I'm the CRO at Catalyst, and I'm just jealous of Brian's beards, Dan's hair, and Udi's smile on this slide. Like, I feel very inadequate right now.
What I know is I've never been as tan as I look in that picture, and so that's false advertising 100%. So I mentioned the sales managers and kind of the desire or the expectation that sales transformation is a must over the coming couple years. Let's unpack that, because in the pre-discussion of this webinar, I think it was really interesting that each leader had kind of a different view on what that means. So I'll go in the same order, and I'll lead with you, Dan, on, when you hear sales transformation, what does that mean for you, and how do you see that from a Challenger perspective?
Okay, yeah, thanks, Brian. And Mark, if it makes you feel any better, that headshot's several years dated at this point, so it's really fresh. So I actually was thinking about this quite a bit because I saw the Forrester quote in prepping for this session. And I think, and probably many people on the line would agree, the term sales transformation gets thrown around a lot. And I'm not sure that we always have a clear understanding consistently around what that means. So my thinking around sales transformation, a lot of times it gets thrown in this general bucket of digital and tech stack transformation. AI is the hot thing right now, which I believe is a component of it. But I think my perspective on it needs to start by looking at what's happening in the market right now. And I would describe it as there's this spiral of chaos happening in B2B buying and B2B selling, where we see from our own research that 90% of all sales interactions have some degree of medium or high customer indecision, meaning they are afraid to pull the trigger on making a purchase decision. And it leads to, somewhere around 60% of all deals just ending in this no decision cycle forever, which I'm sure is something that people are experiencing. But then if you look at some just general data points from our friends at Gartner as well, we see another pieces that lead to this part of chaos. So, 3/4 of buyers don't ever want to talk to a salesperson. They spend less than 20% of their time ever engaging with any vendor at all around a solution. They're doing their own research in the background. So, when you couple that with the fact that, it's tough, the headlines that Brian were talking about there too in the beginning, it's no wonder that almost 90% of sellers are burnt out right now, and over half of them are actively job seeking at the moment, which is kind of a terrifying stat for the sales leaders on the line, but is the reality of the world. So how I define then sales transformation in response to that is really kind of 4 things. One is looking at the types of talent, assessing how we fully assess the types of talent that we need to address that level of chaos in the market right now. The types of roles, behaviors, competencies, all up and down the chain. Like, new logo, existing clients, frontline managers, second line managers, vice presidents of sales. Have we laid out a vision for our most important priorities as a team? Third, have we built a system to execute that vision? And this is, in my opinion, where people actually miss a lot of the time. Having the discipline and operational rigor to consistently execute against, our strategy, having a tech stack that then reflects that. And then have we thought intentionally about what type of sales culture we want to have? Because we all have a sales culture, whether we have designed it or not, but have we been intentional about what ours is? And so that's really how I kind of think about sales transformation. I'm sure there's a lot that I missed there, but I'll pass it over to Udi to add to it.
Thanks, Dan. No, your start was great. I'll focus on something maybe a little more narrow. When we have conversations with sales leaders in the last 12 months, most sales leaders are talking about transforming their teams in 2 key ways. One, making their results more predictable, because forecasting has been all over the place in the last 18 months. And especially in public companies where earnings calls on the street have a huge impact on the company's stock. And of course, they affect private companies' ability to get funding. Predictable outcomes and revenue are super important. Two is productivity and efficiency. How do we get to those predictable results without throwing endless money at the problem, which used to be the operating mode in 2021. Money was free and we all had lots of it. And we could just throw more money at the fire and we could light the dollar bills. We could put more heads on the team. And now we see a lot less of that. And so being a technology company like Gong, obviously we're focused on that aspect of how do we get to more predictable revenue results and how do we do it without just throwing more money at the problem and actually increasing productivity and efficiency. So I'll put two pins in there that we can expand on later if there's interest. But the two main ways that technology is now enabling sales leaders to do that on their teams is, number one, automating away a bunch of things that we could never dream of automating just 6 months ago. Everything from summarizing customer interactions to using generative AI to write very convincing human-like emails and call scripts and summarizing account status. So that's number one, automating away everything that can be. Number two is guiding our sellers on their priorities and what their day should look like so that the things that they are still uniquely qualified to do, like developing trust and rapport and actually moving forward a deal, they get very specific prescriptive guidance on how to do that so that your B players become a lot closer to A players and the whole team becomes more predictable and more productive. So I'll pause there.
That's great. And Mark, you've led revenue teams at two, I think, of the most well-known go-to-market organizations. What do you think as far as sales transformation and what that means for you and for Catalyst?
Yeah, I mean, listen, honestly, like I'm confused. I've been a seller for 25 years, and I've never been able to get away with doing the same thing for more than 3 or 4 or 5 months in a row. So like, isn't sales just constantly changing? Like there's no transformation to make. It's constantly transforming. And if you don't build in the ability to measure what's going on, to understand what needs to be changed, then you may not be a good revenue leader. And so, listen, I think it just boils down to that. A long time, my LinkedIn title or headline thing was "Sales is changing. Are you?" And I think that continues to be the case. Now, you might say that the current need for sales transformation means that there's bigger changes that need to be made in a faster way, and to Udi's point, in a way that's not always with just money. And like, I don't know about y'all, but I call that work. And my daddy taught me to work when I was a kid. And my first boss taught me how to work hard. And I think I still work hard. And so like transformation to me is just about like, are you going to do the work or not? And then if you want to do effective transformation, you better do informed work, which is we're working on the right things and doing things in a way that is going to lead to success versus just changing things to change things because you're desperate and scared. So that's how I think about sales transformation. Is like my teams, we're always changing stuff. Like we're never sitting still. If you need to do a sales transformation, then that might mean that you haven't been moving and changing enough. And so now you're behind. So that's how I think about it.
I think it's a great point. I mean, I think there is certainly a continual evolution, and I am curious where the folks on this call and in the audience what's your role in that? And I think that we've got we see this certainly at the leadership level, and that's where I think it ends up with a deck and sales transformation. This is what we're going to do in this quarter, but also I think a lot of times it's driven by employees or frontline managers who are seeing that need for evolution happen on the front line. So. I think that we're launching a poll right now. I'd love for people to participate, get a better sense of our audience here, and where you sit in that, and if it's something that is relevant to your level in the organization. While people are answering, I do want to make a couple quick comments. I think, Dan, I love what you said about kind of the different levels of being being intentional about how you drive that transformation, because I don't think it's just about you know the tools we have, or the how we move leads into the team, or how we rank those things. Those things happen; they have to be continually evolving. But I also think it's how we manage, how we motivate, what is the culture within the organization, because as was mentioned before, the culture is changing quick, and people are deciding whether they want to stay in these organizations, or they feel like they need to find a new place. All right, we've gotten some good participation. I know we have one poll after this, so I want to get to that, but it looks like we have a significant amount of people who are key stakeholders and VP director level leaders. And so this is perfect. Between the folks on our side, I think we've got some great expertise. Let's jump into the next poll to make sure we have alignment on the rest of the discussion here. And that is, what do you see your company's approach to sales transformation being at this point? We'll launch that here in a second. But I think these are all current things that our customers are seeing. One, and we talked about this a little bit in the pre. I know we'll talk about it more. The change of costs. How do we change our human processes? Is it just that there's massively new functionality available and we can go utilize it? Or is it how do we change how we sell into our opportunities? That poll, the previous poll is up. Are we launching the new one momentarily? Here we go. It's at the bottom if you haven't seen it. And look, this is super interesting. I think Udi made some great points about AI and how quickly it has come to be, game ready, or ready to be in front of our people. But 36% of folks saying layering that into the process, or enhancing, I think is a really great word, the human-led part of the sales process. So those make a lot of sense to me. It's interesting to me how low the percentage of lowering costs is. But that's great. I think that gives us a nice visibility into where your organizations on the call are seeing these right now. So let's get off the record. As you can tell, we've got people with a diverse set of expertise. They're coming from talking with, I think, some of the leading organizations in the world day in and day out. And let's dive right in. So one of the things that, Mark, you said, and this question is going to come to you, is about kind of that continual change, that continual transformation. But I'm curious, when we think about whether this is with Catalyst or previously at Outreach, what is the thing that's driving, or what data? You mentioned informed decisions. Like, what data is forcing that? Because as the chart here shows, at least in our world in tech, hitting quota has been continually harder and harder, or at least that's what it seems in the media. So when you're looking at making informed decisions about changing, about evolving, transforming, what are you looking at, and how are you putting that into perspective when you go take it to CEO, board, whomever?
Yeah, so the first thing that I think that a revenue org owes the business is an operating model. And a lot of you have seen the bow tie. I know Jocker Vanderkooj, who's a good friend of mine, and Winning by Design is very much popularized the visual of the revenue bow tie, with the the pre-sales funnel coming from prospect into deal, and then we win a deal. Now we need to grow and expand that customer. And that's the first thing, is you have to instrument out your customer journey. You have to assign different areas of that journey to a specific role, and clearly define the responsibilities of that role that include: what inputs do I receive from the role previous to me in the customer journey? What outputs am I going to send over to the next role that it gets the customer after I do? What's my conversion rate from input to output? So am I doing it efficiently? What's the time scale it takes me to convert an input to an output? Because if I convert 100% of my leads, but it takes 2 years, the business will die. So we have to make sure that we're doing it quickly. And then we need to quickly understand, what are the volume metrics, or what are the things that, when something's going wrong in that area, how do we start at the top and work our way down through a series of questions to understand where the breakage is? And then once we understand the breakage, we need to say, is this a blip? Meaning, hey, we just had Christmas and how company was off. So of course, inbound lead conversion was down in tail end of December. Or is it a problem? In which case you need to add a program in. And so the thing about sales and revenue is it's just a very large, not very complicated spreadsheet that just talks about different things that happen, volume metrics like our number of dials. Well, the number of dials need to return a number of connects. The dial to connect is a connect rate, and that's a conversion rate of how many dials does it take me to get to talk to somebody. And there's a million little funnels like that inside that those operating models. What I've seen done in the past that seemed to be very effective is we look across the operating model, we look at where there's areas of underperformance to the financial plan, and then we look and say, all right, which area is the easiest to fix that'll have the biggest impact? And then that's where we spend the majority of our time creating a program to lead people through the change that's needed in order to get different results. And so, like, is there a specific number I look at? No, I have a weekly revenue metrics meeting with my finance team and my marketing team, my SDR team leader, my AE team leader, and a couple other folks. And we go through everything all the way from MQL all the way through CSQLs and expansion. And we look at what is the volume metric and then what is the conversion rate for every single one of those, probably 30 or 40 metrics once a week. And it's the owner who owns that slice of the customer's journey's job to say, is the number meeting expectations? If it's not, is it a blip or a problem? If it's a problem, here's the program. And we can only run so many programs at a time with people, so that we, you can't have everybody running a program with AEs to increase all these different numbers, because AEs can only change so much stuff at once. So in general, that's my approach, is have a model, look at it consistently, find the areas that are off, and then determine, are those quick and easy, and attack those really, really hard, but knowing that, like, you can't make too many changes at once.
That's great. The old spreadsheet that still haunts us in the world of all these different SaaS tools, it always comes back to Excel. I'll pass to Udi, and then we'll wrap this one with Dan. Udi, what about yourself when you're talking with Gong clients, and you're looking through their data, or they're talking about a transformation or a new program? What is the data that drives that change, or is there consistency about what data it is?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at this chart, you'll see that in as late as early 2022, everyone's quota attainment was higher. And I think if this chart went backwards to 21, we'd see the numbers even higher. Most of us were hitting quota back then, not because we're all geniuses at operating sales team, because things were objectively easier. Folks' wallets were open and they were spending. Folks didn't mind as much that software that they bought and didn't really use or get value from was becoming shelfware. They didn't even bother churning on them because they had lots of money. And things have changed in the sense that they've gone back to what they were in 2018 or 2019. Folks are being a lot more judicious about where they're spending their money. Folks are looking to ask questions about the value that they're getting from software. They're questioning the decisions of their teams to give freedom to every little sub-team to buy their own tools, and then they end up having 1,600 tools on a team. That's, by the way, an actual number. At some point at Gong, we had 1,600 tools, real number. And now the CFOs and the ops people are going like, well, this is crazy, y'all. Like, let's consolidate on several platforms that are going to do more than one tiny thing, more than one bell or whistle. Let's mandate several platforms across the entire team and not have every rep and every SDR choose the flavor of the month tool that they want right now, because that's not only not secure and doesn't protect our clients' privacy, it's also very capital inefficient. And I think that's what we're seeing. So things have gotten harder, but actually they were always hard before that. We had a couple of years where we like to forget how easy things were. It doesn't mean we were geniuses when things were going well in 2021. It doesn't mean that we're all failures now that things are harder. It just means we have to get back, a lot like Mark said, to common sense, doing the work, working hard. And not everyone is used to this. Some folks, fresh out of college, into their first sales roles or other marketing and SDR roles in 2021, they think it's always been easy, but it hasn't. And any of us here old enough to remember it was not easy, and it's not going to be easy. So companies who are going to do well this year and beyond, those are actually probably going to outlast and outperform those who don't make it, because we now have to figure out things that are actually going to make more productive, efficient, and sustainable companies than many of the companies that were built in 2021.
I think it's a great point, Udi. And one thing that you really, hit on a couple times there, but it was always hard before. And Mark, you mentioned it before. I know before you were going and selling to schools and had to walk in the door and have to go talk to an administrator, and like that is how I remember coming up in sales myself. And I think, Udi, you make a great point, is that certainly post pandemic, or kind of in the wake of the original part of the pandemic, there was just a lot of spending. There was a lot of change, and there was this rapid adjustment, which a lot of people called at the time, a digital transformation of how you were going to do selling. You're going to do it all virtual, and that never stops. And now we're kind of, I think, in the other side where you've got the buyer is certainly burned out. It sounds like from Dan's research that many times the seller is burned out, or the seller feels underappreciated. And I think that is more like what the normal has been, or the typical year has been over the past at least 2 decades in our tech world. It's been interesting. I'll just talk for a second, because I think we lost Dan to maybe some power issues in the Pacific Northwest. But in addition, we've served customers of all different industries, so not just technology companies, and we've seen what I'd call like a retrench in all those industries over the past really 16 to 18 months. It's been different industries at different times, but they're all getting back to kind of, Udi, what you described, a reset. Like we're maybe over our skis on X, Y, or Z. We have too many tools. We have people who felt a little bit too free with setting up systems. And ultimately, they're trying to get to what exactly Mark described, which is we have a prescriptive operating model, and we need it to work very consistently. And here's how it's going to go. And so it's less of a what I call new transformation, and more of a reset on how people were operating prior. Let's dive into the next one. And I think this is really interesting, especially from a world where a lot of us grew up with predictable revenue being like, a sales, for lack of a word, like it's the guidebook. You do these segmentations, you create these customized roles, you do very specific things. And roles are changing again. And I'll lead with Udi here, because I think you had some great comments about what Gong is doing, but also what you're seeing as people change even the structure and the responsibilities within their sales organization for this new environment.
Yeah, what we've seen both at Gong and with many of our customers, that org charts and roles tend to expand and specialize to a point where sometimes they over-specialize, and then they contract and consolidate, and then they expand and grow these tentacles of specialization in other areas. And once they reach some sort of equilibrium there, they might contract again. So I'll give some examples. We've seen, and Mark, you'll appreciate this as it's specifically in your space, we've seen over the years that our customer success team has become very specialized. So there used to be one CS manager who used to do everything for the customer. And then at some point we found ourselves that there's deployment specialists that only come in for those first few weeks of deployment. And then there's training specialists that come and do that. And then there's the PS guys that do some part of integration. And then there's the success managers and the renewal managers. And something similar sort of mirrored and happened in our sales team, where we had new business reps and we had customer growth managers. And we found that what used to be 1 or 2 roles quickly became 6 or 8 roles. And not all of them always had a full-time job, and not all of them were hitting quota. And it turned out that sometimes that there can be too many chefs in the kitchen. And when the responsibility for a customer success is broken down amongst so many people, no one's really responsible for that customer success anymore. There's plenty of research out there showing that the shared responsibility, the more you slice it up between people feel less and less responsible for that common goal that they're trying to hit together. And so now we're contracting that back, and we're consolidating a lot of those roles to have fewer people own a customer's success. So that's one place where we think we've gone too far in some ways. But to give an example of how this process continues to ebb and flow on what you described here as boundary spanners, one of the things that we've seen a lot of success in the last year is I've been working with our partnerships team on working with private equity firms and seeing how we can grow our footprint in their portfolio companies. So let's say there's a PE firm with 100 companies and maybe only 50 of them are using Gong. How can we get to those remaining 50? And we found that while the partnership team and I were doing a decent job of getting in there and getting a lot of interest, once we wanted to transfer the operational responsibility of the sales team, those 50 accounts could have been owned by 50 different reps on our team. And it was really, really hard to coordinate. How can we use all those internal references from other portfolio companies in that PE, and how can we make sure that they all get the special terms that we want to offer that PE? So one of the things we're experimenting with now is having dedicated AEs who own that PE. So now we're consolidating those 50 accounts that might have been distributed amongst 50 different reps into only 1 or 2 reps for that entire PE. So then now the partnership team and I have 1 or 2 contact points on the sales team, not 50, that we can go to and try a coordinated rollout of this program for the PE. Maybe that'll work and we'll expand it. Maybe it won't and we'll contract it back again. We'll see.
Udi, I think that's hyper, tactical advice that people can walk out of here and put into their suggestions for SKO for 2024 plans. But that, we used to call this a pod system, and people have different, we used to have territories that were just east, west, north, midwest, whatever, EMEA. And now I think the idea of specializing and doing, whether it's a pod or a group around a use case or a customer type that's very, very specific, I think that's a great one that people can run with. I'll kick it to Mark. Have you seen, you referenced some of the folks in the customer success work, but as a revenue leader, what are you seeing as far as roles change or evolution of roles from your customers?
Listen, I ain't a Harvard guy. I have no idea what a boundary spanner or an EET are. Like, that sounds like...
We had to cite it. I didn't make it up. It's cited.
That sounds like academic mumbo jumbo. Like, I don't know. But here's the deal is, how am I seeing roles transform? I'm seeing that, I don't know if, I'm seeing a little bit of what Udi's seeing, where like we've maybe have over specialized a bit. We need to shrink back down to people that have more of a quote unquote full-time job. But most of what I'm seeing is like the number of people in a role is shrinking down. So maybe you had 100 AEs, but now you need to get it down to 80. Maybe you had 70 CSMs, but you need to get it down to 40. That's the main change I'm seeing, is just companies that are continuing to grow so they're adding new customers and new responsibilities and new headaches and new work, are cutting down the number of people that there are to do the work. And in many cases, they're cutting down on the tools that need to do the work, but the demand is either the same or increasing for the amount of work that needs to be done, and all the things that go along with that. And so that's where I'm seeing things are very different. And call me old guy, get off my lawn, but like, the amount of people that will go to Europe for 3 weeks in a company, like in the early 20s, was astounding to me. Like, I listen, maybe I did it wrong in my life. I'm 47. I never like took a sabbatical for 2 months and then came back to my job. I was too worried that I wouldn't be able to pay my bills. And I got 4 kids, so I got a lot of bills. So listen, I don't know, but I think that we're transforming back to an era where you actually got to show up for 40 or 50 hours a week to do your job. Tech jobs are super high paying. I don't think it is irrational to expect a lot of work for the amount of pay that you get in the tech sector. And I think that we're just moving back to a more work-intensive environment where the expectations to do work are just going to be higher. And you're either into that and you're going to flourish and you've been waiting for this, or you're going to revolt from it and you need to go find another job somewhere at a company that's probably going to change their mind on it soon too. So that's mostly what I'm seeing. I'm not seeing, a lot of people are trying to change tactics, I think, honestly, and strategies. I think a lot of that's just knee-jerk reaction. Like, if you were doing that poorly before that you need to completely change things over, then you might have a more systemic problem. But I'm just seeing that there's just less people, but there's the same or more work to do. And so those people are going to have to bear the brunt of that.
That's a great point. I mean, the responsibilities, I do not think, are diminished. And I definitely can agree that I think expectations the responsibilities of roles are increasing. And maybe I'd counter a little bit, Mark. I think from what we're seeing, one of the maybe a really simple one is, when I got into sales, it was an ISR, and the ISR did everything from qualify the lead, originally communicate with the lead, get it booked, do a discovery meeting, and then you sold it all the way to close one. You handed it off. Well, we've carved that up a bunch of ways, right? Over the years, we've got inbound SDR, outbound SDR. You've got someone who may, take the next part of it. And I think that's consolidating, or we've seen that consolidate more. Dan, I'm curious, in terms of role evolution and transformation of roles, what are you and Challenger seeing?
Yeah, so a couple thoughts, and apologies, everyone. We're having a weather event here in Portland, so I lost connection for a minute, but hopefully you don't. If I go dark, that's what happens. I would go back to actually something Mark said earlier in the presentation, and that, why are we talking about sales for transformation now? And things have always been changing. I would completely agree with that. And I think one thing I might posit to this audience is that the degree of difficulty in a large enterprise, complex B2B sale is much higher than it was when we were all individual sellers. If you're a sales leader right now, it's harder to make a sale than it was when we were doing it ourselves. And so one area that I would say that I have seen really an evolution around and a more crystal clear focus on is focusing more on getting more out of existing customers. New logo acquisition, in a tight market, the leads don't just flow, right? And so that doesn't mean that we can't acquire new logos. In fact, we saw good new logo acquisition with our team last year, but we still rely, speaking of our own sales force and looking at our client base, a healthy portion of revenue comes from the existing client base, both in terms of renewals, expansion, growth, cross-sell. And one of the things that I think we're seeing in our client base is a real understanding that account director, account manager type roles need to have a crisp understanding of the outcomes they are driving for their clients. What we would call customer improvement, and less of a focus on kind of the traditional model of great service, surprise and delight, be excellent relationship managers for your clients, because every piece of research in the market right now would suggest that ain't going to work anymore. Relationships are fickle. When we see turnover in our client base, in our seller base, it doesn't do anyone any good if you have an excellent relationship and both the seller and the buyer are gone next year, right? And so how do you really hang your hat on demonstrated customer improvement, which can then lead to the earning the right to ask your client to spend more with you year over year? And so I think I've seen a crisper understanding in account, like existing sale commercial type roles, account directors, account management type roles, on driving a heavier level of scrutiny on customer outcomes that lead to better commercial outcomes for the sales team.
The actual impact and the outcomes, I think, is something that, and this was touched on in a couple different answers on the way here, but we, as at least in the tech world, we think about this: how can we better show ROI? How can we better show utilization? But ultimately, what the company cares about is, did we sell more stuff, or did we sell stuff more effectively, or whatever? And they're very, for them, it is, I don't care what product drove it. I care, did we do it? And then, they're going to argue about which product drove it later on. With that kind of, link to the impact and the performance, let's jump to how performance expectations are changing on sellers, because I think this was a really interesting pre-conversation discussion. This is kind of linking back to that first slide when we talked about Salesforce is kind of ending the so-called party for their sellers. They have maybe what we would consider more granular or more stringent PIP criteria that they rolled out publicly, or at least they were leaked publicly. And I'm going to kick it to Dan on this one first, but with that expectation change, and whether it's just reverting to the norm, and we were so far off the norm, what are you all seeing, and do you think that this is it is fair to change those expectations? Do you think this is happening everywhere, and how do you think organizations should deal with the juxtaposition. Dan, you're first, so I'll give you this hard one, but like reps who may be, less thrilled than they used to be with also higher expectations or more responsibility of what they need to bring in.
Yeah, I think it is fair to change expectations. I mean, the environment's changing, and so I think it's always not just fair, but prudent to evaluate your understanding of performance of your reps, productivity of your reps, and ultimately how you're going to improve and what is the process to improve performance where it's lagging. So I think that's something we should always have a keen eye to. I think it's also completely fair to have clear and high expectations of reps too, and then to make it clear to them that we either need to see improvement or this is not going to be the best place for you, right? Going to what Mark was referencing earlier with the hard work piece of it. What I will say though is not being familiar intimately with how Salesforce manages this. I also think it's really important to have a clear picture as a sales leadership team on, do we actually understand the why behind the lagging performance of any individual rep or territory? Because I think as sales leaders, sometimes we might all know those reps that crush it one year, but you're like, yeah, they kind of got a little lucky, had a good territory. So it's not the only thing to hang your hat on, or those reps that are rock stars that have an off quarter, off year, right? And I know some of us are, I'm sure there's some of those reps that have never missed plan, but I'm sure all of us can pick to a point or two in our career where it's happened. And so I really think, and this is just my own personal perspective, that it's really important to have a fuller picture of measurements, what I would kind of put in the managed objective category for each seller, around the things that we think define, success for reps in addition to quota attainment. And this might be things like, an activity metric. Are they regularly adding pipeline opportunities, or whatever your activity metric is for your business? Do we have measurable behaviors that we can observe? I mentioned to Udi when we chatted earlier this week that we've started to leverage Gong and Gong's AI tool with our own sellers to understand how well our own seller choreography is taking place and if buyers are responding to that. So that's another managed objective that we're going to be leveraging this year. And then forecasting accuracy, I think, is a really, really good a good objective to put on reps too, because you want to know whether your rep knew what they were doing in exceeding plan or missing plan, or if they blindly stumbled across the finish line, which we've all seen happen before too. And so I guess to boil all that down, this stuff is really important. I don't think anyone would dispute that, but I also think you need to know as a leader, did that happen by accident or did it happen intentionally? And that's the other major piece that I would put as the qualifier around this, that leads to the performance improvement process.
I'd love to jump in and just put a bow around what Dan talked about, and that is a lot of people view conversation intelligence, revenue intelligence tools like Gong as something that is potentially a policing tool or will eventually replace people. And I want to suggest the actual spirit in which these tools were created and are best used, and that's more similar to what Dan talked about, which is how do we empower our people? How do we analyze what the best performers are doing so that we can replicate that to some of our B players and get them to become closer to the way A players are performing? How can we empower people with automation and guidance that I talked about earlier so they can be the best versions of themselves? They can be this super sales machine that they were meant to be, and not looking at these tools as a threat because they're going to be used to police people or replace them. Like any technology, and there's so many discussions about AI and so many technologies that can be used in a bad way or for some, by bad actors in ways that were not intended. But the way in which I propose that these technologies be used is to empower people and make them the best version that they can be.
That's great, and I definitely agree that certainly I think we all want to drive that improvement. I love the reference to turning your B or C players into A players, and I personally believe, and I'll kick it to Mark here in a second, but Dan, what you mentioned with a more holistic view of all the metrics. If you're just looking at bookings or closed won or whatever it is at a certain snippet of time, that'll give you a picture, but I think ultimately it is, the whole process, back to what Mark said, this whole giant funnel, and wherever your responsibility lies in that giant funnel, whether it's, booking meetings, making calls, setting up new opportunities, you have to see it so that you can dial in on that specific conversion point or that specific skill set that will drive it. Mark, in your experience, driving and changing performance expectations, how have you done about it? Like, what can you give to the audience of tactically they can say, sure, we are changing our expectations this year. We have a higher level of responsibility or expectation to the rep success. How do you go do that successfully?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I don't know if it's good or bad, but I can always help somebody kind of person, and I probably hold on to people a little too long and think that, everybody wants to do better and get better, and it doesn't always turn out that way. But like, I think that in general, when you need when you're changing expectations, you have to have really clear and honest communication about what the new expectations are and why they exist. And I think that that's the key. Like, listen, if you want to put somebody on a PIP after 1 quarter of unperformance, okay. Like, I don't know if that seems a little bit aggressive to me. But like, you need to make sure that you communicate that and tell people why you're communicating it and why you've made that decision. That's the big thing for me. I just think that in general, people, what you want to do is quickly understand, are people coachable or not? Coachable people can always get better. Uncoachable people, they may get better, they may not. And like for me, I need a group of people that are dedicated to getting better. They want to get better, not just with their manager, but on their own and throughout their own stuff. And so that's mostly what I'm looking for. And that's what I would communicate to people if I was going to make wholesale changes. Like, listen, not every change we're going to make is going to be right. Not every change that we make right is going to actually impact you or your results. And there's going to be a lot of change management along the way, which isn't comfortable for anybody. So if all of that is true, then we need to make sure that you are in a state where you're willing to be coached. You're willing to, if you don't agree, you're willing to disagree and commit. And we're going to figure out what the data says, and then we're going to do what the data says to do that helps us get the best performance. But yeah, I think that really expectations always come down to communication and the why. And as long as that stuff makes sense, your people are good. If the stuff doesn't make sense, then you're going to lose people, and you would have lost them anyway because what you're doing doesn't make sense. So
Yeah, the one thing I want to highlight there, and or maybe add in addition to the coachable side, because I think certainly all of us who are leading teams or leading individual reps or sellers, coachability is key. The other side is, can you see it? If you're selling multi-million-dollar deals that take 9 months, how do you measure if someone is making changes? And so I think, once again, to link back to what Dan said, you need a variety of metrics, because maybe it is, not just, did this deal close one? Did this person hit quota this year? Well, that quota may be made up of a small amount of deals with very large ACV or very large sticker price. But can you consistently go and take the things that a Mark is telling you, implement it next week, and change that change that performance week in, week out as you go through it? We got about 12 minutes left, so I want to make sure we get to our last slide. And this one is really interesting. I'll kind of lead with this, but this has been widely talked about. Udi had a great reference earlier in the call to the statements from public companies. I'm sure some of the folks on here are at really large enterprise organizations where you've changed from a growth at all cost mindset, or how do we grow 10% better or 20% better? What do we get into this vaulted kind of stratosphere of companies? And the expectations, at least from investors, public and private, has become, how effective are you with the go-to-market spend you have? Whether that is, being highly efficient at an employee level, revenue per employee, whether that is, profitability and changing from, growth to profitability, which is in some cases a radical shift, or maybe, as we see on the chart here, suggested, net dollar retention, or how good are you at serving your customers so that even with your existing customer base, you can still grow year over year by selling them more stuff or expanding the use case within the customer. I think for companies that we serve, we've seen this and how it has impacted the structure of their organization across the board. Whether it is changing from a high level of outbound attacking new logos, attacking new industries, to, like Mark said, we've shrunken our organization and now we're trying to serve them to the best of our ability so they never leave us. Guys, I'd love to have another 10 minutes or so of conversation. I'll kick it to Udi first. Udi, what have you seen as far as people changing their go-to-market approach or their go-to-market strategy aligned with their kind of corporate targets?
Yeah, I want to start by addressing the quote at the top right of the slide that you're showing. Lots of respect to our friends at GTM Partners. I think the second part of the quote there is saying that the lowered ARR implies products no longer meet customer ongoing needs. I think in a steady state world, that would be correct most of the time. In the last 18 months, we've been in something that can be described as anything except a steady state world. And most of the best companies out there have seen a decline in NRR. And there are a bunch of reasons that happened that are extrinsic to the company's product market fit and go-to-market fit. Some of the most obvious ones are small customers that are going out of business. They could love your product, be crying as they shut it off, but they can't continue paying for it. Lots of amazing companies, private and public, had to go through right sizing. That means they need a lot fewer software licenses, even if they love your software. We had some of our big customers, they downsized so much that they ended up having more Gong licenses than employees left in the company. So with all the sadness in the world, we had to accept their reduced NRR. And I can keep going, but I think you're getting the point that there's many objective reasons that are external to whatever product market fit, go-to-market fit you have. And you could have the highest NPS and the highest NRR, but if your customers are going out of business or reducing headcount, you're going to get less income from those companies. So that's what we've seen. I'm not going to steal Dan or Mark's thunder. I know they're going to talk about the relationship between NRR and NPS. I'm going to leave that to them. I will say that this ties back to things that we talked about earlier of taking a much deeper look into the productivity and efficiency and effectiveness, different metrics, by the way, of a sales team to see things that we let slide in the last 2 years, they no longer get to slide. And now that money is not cheap or free anymore, how do we make sure that our team is focused on the right things and are doing the right things? And the last thing I'll mention here is this is also an opportunity for us and many other companies to look at their ICP and let go of the wrong customers. Some of them are going to slip away and they're not all worth fighting for. If your R&D plans or your support or their support needs are so out of the norm of what you're used to giving, maybe this is a good time to clean out your customer roster, let the bad customers flush out, and then focus on bringing in those that are closer to your ICP, because we all know that we've sold to some wrong customers along the years. And maybe it's not a terrible thing that they're leaving us now.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to go to Mark and then we'll close with Dan. But Mark, how have you seen the primary directive or the primary goal change and how that affects go-to-market approach?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. Is we went from growth rate to NRR. Like that's what happened. All anybody used to care about is how much did you grow over last year? Did you do the triple, double BS or whatever it is, right? Like, even though you did it when you burned $100 million in cash and you don't even have a real product, you just like figured out how to hack the system. So I don't know, again, I'm going to show my age here. Thought the point of a business was to be profitable and make money. I'm surprised that it took so many people this long to kind of get on the train. And I think that good companies think about this a lot. I know at Outreach, we obsessed over NRR before anybody else even talked about NRR. It's something that we tracked a lot. We optimized it and we crushed it in some of the segments in a major way because it was a point of emphasis for us. And a point of pride, to be honest, because of where we sat in the numbers. But yeah, I think that one reason I'm at Catalyst is this is a consistent narrative that is happening in boardrooms. And I think, companies that are in place to help solve it are going to do really, really well right now. But I 100% agree with Udi. This GTM partners thing is an overgeneralization about, that's like somebody trying to get clickbait or something. That's kind of a ridiculous quote up in the top right corner there. There's a lot of things that tell you if you have go-to-market fit. NRR may be one of the indicators, but yeah, I just think that in general, people are focusing on this versus focusing on grow rate, and that dictates that there has to be some kind of change in strategy to in order to focus on that and to improve it.
Yeah, absolutely. Dan, you guys serve, I think, some of the most well-known brands in the world. So my assumption is that you haven't just seen people who are focused on growth rate. You probably have really large customers who focus on a variety of metrics. Can you kind of give the challenger expectation or challenger's version of how this has affected the customers you guys work with?
Yeah, maybe I plus one or two to what Udi and Mark just said. Maybe the piece that I would add that I don't think's been touched on yet is, when we look at go-to-market fit, oftentimes the test of that is how loyal are your customers to your solution, right? Do they love it so much, that it's indispensable to them? It's critical as a must have as opposed to a nice to have. I think the thing I'm going to zero in on here is this vanity metrics piece, and why I like NRR as a true test of customer loyalty is, oftentimes, and I still see people do this, we focus on vanity metrics like NPS, for example, or customer service, CSAT, customer satisfaction. Those are, I will say, interesting. However, there's a growing body of research to suggest that NPS has virtually no correlation with a client spending with you again or spending more with you next year. And I think part of that boils down to the fact that NPS is an individual person's perspective, right? And we know that buying groups are made up of diverse groups of stakeholders that are huge and unwieldy. And so it really doesn't matter if you have a champion that loves your solution and is willing to refer your solution somewhere else. If the CFO isn't willing to spend more money on it, it didn't work. And so, I think going to, the true test of client loyalty is, did they spend again, and did they spend more? Like that's the true metric. And so I think it's really important to look at metrics like this as, the opposite, what you might call sanity metrics, that are, that actually the test of how well you fit your fit hits the market, as opposed to, the client's feeling about, how much they love it.
And what's interesting about that, Dan, is, back to Udi's point, I mean, that can be judged a variety of ways. Like, we've certainly seen retraction from lots of companies saying they used to have 10,000 salespeople, now they only need 7,500 salespeople. And so, the measurement of logo retention versus purely how many, dollars did they spend or how many seats did they subscribe to, I think those things will continue to evolve, certainly coming out of a period of a lot of reorganization, realignment of companies. But to wrap it up and to close it out for everyone who's still with us, I mean, this has been awesome. I think, maybe the biggest takeaways, if we get a couple questions, that'd be awesome. But to me, the biggest takeaways are, and you guys described it so eloquently, like, sales is always changing. If you're not transforming, if you're not continually trying to improve, continually trying to adjust what you're doing, the market is chaotic. Things are happening outside anyway. And when you do change, you've got to be evidence-driven, data-driven. You've got to make sure you can actually act on what you're finding from within your processes or within your go-to-market approach. So to everyone who joined us, thank you so much. To my fellow guests on the panelists, Udi, Mark, and Dan, thank you all so much for lending just a ton of information, a ton of knowledge, a ton of leadership in your own experience to this conversation. I think everyone probably already follows you guys, but please follow these folks on LinkedIn. Please reach out to them. I know they'd be happy to connect. They represent some of the best companies in the go-to-market world. So thank you guys again, and thanks everyone for joining. Have a great day.
Have a good one.
That's all.